Today we're going to discuss some Admech units and tactics adapting to the new edition. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy focused 40k channel where we're all about getting the most out of our miniatures on the tabletop. In today's video we're continuing in our look at various factions in 9th edition, and it's time to look at the forces of the Machine God themselves. In the video we'll talk about a few of the rules changes jumping from 8th to 9th that have changed for the Admech, discuss each Admech unit in turn and roughly how its points has changed from 8th to 9th, sum up some of the things that might be strongest going forwards, and then I'll just show one example army list that I've made. So in general, following Psychic Awakening Engine War, I think that Admech were really beginning to be one of the top factions in 8th. They just had some ridiculous amounts of synergy, and Engine War gave them so many decent buffs. Unfortunately the rules do seem to have hit them in a few places going into 9th, maybe a little bit more so than some other factions. Vehicle buffs to moving and shooting with big guns never tire is certainly not bad for Admech, though a lot of their vehicles did already have it. It's only really useful for things like the Iron Striders and the Stratoraptor. The Onagers and Scorpius tanks already had that rule already, so it didn't really buff them. However, vehicle shooting in close combat or gaining blast special rules is no bad thing, particularly firing in combat, which is a particular boon to an army that doesn't have normal tricks for falling back and shooting, outside of a few niche circumstances. I think that strategic reserves could be pretty helpful for the Admech, particularly for delivering short-range threatening units such as Corpuscari Electro Priests or Vanguard, and the missions in 9th do often involve scrapping over objectives all game long, and that's something that I think that Admech can do. They do have some decent troops in Vanguard and Cataphron Breachers, which means this isn't as bad news for them as some factions. However, they did take a few heavy hits. The Vigilist detachments are gone from competitive play in the Grand Tournament pack. In particular, the one that gave the Cataphrons the invul save was something that was particularly potent. The fact that modifiers don't stack anymore is particularly sad for units such as Dragoons. They could be -2 to hit with Styges and get +2 to hit from their Doctrine Imperative in close combat, so it has made them significantly less scary as a unit. And the FAQ changes have cleared up a few issues with Engine War that I suspect weren't intended in the first place. Unfortunately now you do have to choose just one Holy Order Warlord trait. You can't have all 4 with the Mechanicus Locum stratagem, which will pretty much auto-includes in a lot of shooting castle lists. They've changed taser-type weaponry to only get extra hits on unmodified 6s rather than just plain 6s, which further hurts the Dragoons because they can't get exploding hits on a 4+ anymore. And the Forge World specific Canticles of the Omnissiah only affect units that are the same Forge World now, which does make sense, but it does limit some powerful combos, such as say having the Mars extra heavy weapon penalty on say Styges units for example. I would say that the core rules changes from 8th to 9th have probably hurt more than they've helped, but not to the extent where it's really going to affect the army on too big a level. If we start looking through some units now, in the HQ section there have been only modest changes to the characters, as it seems that the HQ choices have only gone up by 5 points in general, though strangely enough the Tech Priest Dominus has seen a points decrease, and he's very takeable indeed now at just 80 points. I don't think the HQ changes have really changed too much, aside from Dominus's being better, the rest of them are pretty much in line with what they did before, and I don't really think it'll affect whether or not you take them. For the troops, both types of Cataphrons have done fairly well out of the changes. Unfortunately the Breachers with arc rifles and claws have jumped up to 35 points from 30, though to be honest I think that they were a bit undercosted before. They were just incredibly efficient for what they could do with the synergies that Admech could provide, and I still think that they're very usable indeed, particularly now it helps to have some tough meaty units to take and hold objectives. The Destroyers got a fairly on par with average points increase, and Plasma Destroyers are still a fairly pricey unit that will do a scary amount of damage and pretty much delete whatever you throw them at. Both Vanguard and Rangers have gone to 9 points each now, which I think is generally going to tip people into using Vanguard over Rangers for the most part. Plasma Calivers also dropped from 11 points to 10, so I suspect that we'll be seeing even more of them than we were before. Could be quite nice just jumping out of strategic reserves on a flank, plasmaing something, and then maybe charging into an enemy unit to tie it up or take an objective. Moving on to some of the other slots, the Elite section hasn't really made it out too great in terms of points. Both Electro Priest types got slightly above average rises, though I don't think it's enough to stop them being competitive units. The Corpuscari can use that excellent stratagem from Engine War for high AP, high volume fire, and the Fulgurites are still a go-to elite unit for mashing anything in combat. Servitors are up a few points, pretty much still just there if you want a cheap filler unit to screen or something. But Infiltrators and Rust Stalkers got far above average points increases, which I think means that we won't be seeing them anywhere near as much. Rust Stalkers were already pretty borderline, and Infiltrators were okay but received an even bigger points rise. I'd argue that from the change from 8th to 9th and with Engine War, the Iron Strider Ballistari are possibly some of the biggest winners from the Admech decks. The autocannon variant only raised from 60 points to 65, and the twin lascannon variant actually fell in points from 80 to 75. Now these guys can get +1 to wound from a stratagem in engine war, and in combination with rerolls from Call or a Tech Priest, and maybe the exploding sixes of a Holy Order Warlord trait, and maybe even +1 strength from the Mars Canticle, the autocannon variant in particular is a really efficient long-range anti-everything choice. It only got better that they can shoot in close combat now, and they can also move and fire for no ballistic skill penalty. I think that we'll be seeing a lot of them on the table in 9th. The autocannons I think were better than the lascannons in 8th, but now there's only 10 points in it. I think that we might even start seeing some lascannons again, if that's more the type of firepower bracket that your army needs to fill. Their cousins the Dragoons got a very small points increase of just +3%, so it's not all bad news for them, and I still think that they could be used as a scary early threat unit, or maybe just hanging around for counter-charging. I don't think they're quite as strong as they were before though, due to the rules changes. Sterilizers, Skystalkers, Raiders and Sulphurhounds all went up in points pretty much on line with most things in Warhammer 40k, so not that much has changed for them. The Raiders in particular I still think are really solid as a screening unit. Moving on to heavy support, the Castellan robots with Phosphor Blaster only went up about in line with points changes as well, but again they benefited hugely from being able to move and shoot with no penalty, and also blaze away with their heavy weapons in close combat should they need to. It's really helped fix one of their core weaknesses, which is being tagged in melee and making them useless. Now they'll be able to pulverise whatever was tagging them with an absolute ton of phosphor shots. For the Onager Dune Crawlers, most variants went up to 115 points from 100, but the Neutron Laser took a bit of an extra hit, jumping up to 130. I still think that basically the main choices are the Neutron Laser or the Icarus Array, though perhaps the Neutron Laser took a small hit from this change. Finally, for the heavy support, the Scorpius Disintegrator has taken a bit of a nerf, the Ferromite version up to 155, and the Energy Cannon 1 to 150. I would have argued that these things were undercosted in the current state of the game, so I suspect that even with this very hefty nerf it hasn't probably killed them completely, and I think that you could still take them in the lists. They have gone from being a standout choice though to just a lot more run-of-the-mill. The Energy Cannon variant's certainly useful for being able to provide some ignores line of sight fire support, but now you are going to be paying a big premium for it. Finally we get onto the Flyers and the Dune Rider. The Dune Rider's gone up significantly, up to 100, so again you are going to be paying a premium for the extra mobility, but I do think that transport vehicles are pretty handy in 9th edition, again for snagging objectives with a whole bunch of OBSEC troops. I think it'll still see play, but we will see fewer armies that are spamming 6 of the things. For the Flyers, the Fusilier and Transvector have both gone up pretty much in line with standard points changes, and they have gained from the rule that allows them to move and shoot with no penalty. But the real winner is the Stratoraptor, which has gone up from 144 to 150, so a very small increase on the main gun version of the Flyer. This thing will now be able to swoop across the battlefield and blaze away very accurately with all of its firepower. The chaff launchers have remained where they are at 20 points if you want to include them. So overall for the Admech, the changes in the core book haven't been amazingly helpful, and the vast majority of the decks has gone up in line with the standard points rises from 8th to 9th. But I think despite this, the army looks like a very scary force going into 9th. In terms of winning units, I think that Call and the Dominus came out very lightly in the HQ section, Vanguard with Plasma and Arc Cataphrons in the troops. Very nice Iron Strider Ballistare are looking good in units of 5. I don't think you'll typically want to go for more than this due to unit coherency and blast weapons. And for some other gun platforms, Castellan Robots, Icarus Dune Crawlers and the Stratoraptor seem to be quite cool. I suspect that the main Warlord trait that will get played will be the Holy Order Warlord trait that gets you the exploding 6s to shooting, as it just means that you have a massively amplified shooting castle, though the one with the Feel No Pain type save to the Cataphrons might get a look in a list that's planning to spam them. My go-to Forge Worlds will still be Mars, Lucius and Styges primarily, or perhaps the Data Horde Forge World in the right circumstances. I think that most lists will have to adapt a bit and have some sort of a hardy advancing threat to go and grab objectives for the first few turns, because in 9th I do feel it's a lot harder to just castle up and wipe the opponent off the table and then score in the later turns. Your opponent might get to an insurmountable lead before that even happens. I think that units like Vanguard, Electro Priests of both varieties, Cataphron Breachers and Cerberus Raiders will all be decent for this role. Finally, here's just a quick 2000 point list together that I threw together. Nothing too optimised, but just trying to use some of the things that I think will be strongest. This one's a single Mars Battalion, headed up by Core, a Tech Priest Manipulus with the Major's Holy Order Warlord trait for the exploding 6s to hit, and Data Losses to give one unit +1 to hit. They will generally be forming a nice shooting castle, alongside a huge unit of Iron Striders with the autocannons, and 3 Onagers with the Icarus Array. The Mars unique Canticle can allow them to get their heavy weapons from strength 7 to strength 8, which is a really important breakpoint for taking out a whole load of units across the game. The Iron Striders in particular could have +1 to wound with their own stratagem, and perhaps even use Wrath of Mars for extra mortal wounds. Hovering about, we also have 2 Stratoraptors, who could try and get in range of the shooting castle, but are there also just to be able to zoom off to the other side of the board, maybe assassinate characters with las cannons, or just chew up some enemy infantry that are hiding out of line of sight. To screen the shooting death castle, we've got 3 units of Cerberus Raiders, which will move up to the midfield turn 1 and block movement or secure objectives, and then behind them 4 units of 3 Cataphoron Breachers armed with heavy arc rifles, fairly durable and should be able to hold down some objectives. Finally, and typically in strategic reserve, we've got 1 big unit of 10 Corpuscari Electro Priests, whose main aim is to jump onto the side of the board and blast away with 1,000,000 Tesla shots. Again, potentially thinking about using their own stratagem, and maybe even Wrath of Mars to delete something scary. I think we've got enough shots to chew up pretty much all enemy infantry, though perhaps anti-tank could be a little bit of a struggle if we do lose the Iron Striders too early. Again, not necessarily supposed to be the most super optimised list ever, but I think a lot of lists would find it problematic just to have to deal with so many dangerous units with high strength and high rate of fire. So if you've been having any experience with Admech in 9th, please let me know down in the comments below. It'd be good to get any further insights from actual games played. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to the channel, where we'll have regular 40k content coming out pretty much every day. Finally, if you have been enjoying my videos, I'd just like to mention that the channel does have a Patreon page, which is down in the video description below. Making all of these videos does take quite a long time, so if you are watching regularly, then any support is massively appreciated. Channel patrons get to see a video early each week, there are regular polls to see what sort of videos come next for us, and you also get automatically entered into the Auspex Tactics prize giveaway, which happens at the start of each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support the channel, then the link is down in the video description below. Feel free to give it a check out. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.